to wood, makes sense. And when the planning phase is over, the convoy comes in, as you can see the design change a bit from the gray shoebox, and traps are triggered. Convoy is stopped, weak point appears, and then you try to do as much damage as you can before the convoy starts again. It was kind of fun-ish, I guess, but the same problem applied. Like melee characters were pretty boring because you needed to basically get close to a wall and just smash it, which is not very fun. But this kind of moment here, I think we all saw potential for it to look very nice. But yeah, essentially, like it was still not very fun. At one point here, I think we're going to see like the. We tried to make like melee characters be able to pull these parts away to compensate for the fact that you will need it to be very close to it all the time. And then you had these pizza boxes completely stolen from Death Stranding that you could like take to your exit zone. Prototype number 3 of Life 2. There you go. So here we started out building our current lobby, the hideout where you actually take your missions and meet with your friends and start the missions. And here I think is the most advanced iteration we did on this convoy mechanic. Now the mission will start. All right, so here the environment is way more constructed and designed. This mission takes place in a town. We had these very contextual traps with a preview of what the trap would do. This was a water meal. There was still a preparation phase in which you had to wait. Then the convoy would come in. We started adding like small cutscenes. There are like characters shooting guns at the convoys. And then like you would like be able to trigger this water mill that would smash into the convoy, stop the convoy. And actually here you didn't need to actually damage it, but you actually needed to rush to the next trap point, set it up so that when the convoy restarts, then you're actually in a good position to trigger the next trap on the convoy. There you go. Big bell. So, and then eventually, same thing, you are able to get the loot from the convoy, exit zone, blah, blah, blah. All the same problems still applied. Like, it was, I would say that essentially it was not fun, but we could not see how we could build a full game on top of this. Like, let's say make 15 missions out of this, it was. We didn't have enough ideas to spice things up and make missions differently, unless really like going for like big set pieces like AAA, but that we didn't have the time nor money to do that. So prototype 3 of Life 2, prototype 4, Life 2, yeah. So here we decided to trade systems and mechanics for production values. So we decided to make everything look nicer, but we decided to remove everything that had this real-time convoy implied. So in this prototype, there's no real-time convoy anymore. You traverse a level, you fight enemies, and then you get at a trap point like this, you set up your traps, and then at that point the convoy appears. It's all contextual, right? But the idea is that the narratives would convey that you're running to get in time for the convoy, like, the characters will be like, quick, we need to run because we need to get there before the convoy arrives. And then trap unfolds. This actually looks very cool. I think it actually looks better than what the game looks right now. It's really cool. And essentially, this fight, this assault would turn into like more of a boss fight than something that is really a new gameplay. And honestly, like, let's be honest, if like convoy assault was a game genre, like, people would do it already. So, the principle of an assault, an ambush, is that you have to wait for a long time before whatever you are assaulting comes by, which is boring. And then if you execute your ambush well, it lasts like as short as possible, right? Which is also kind of like counterintuitive to design gameplay around. So, yeah, it looked nice, but it didn't really work that well. So, enter Life 3. At this point, we actually had a very honest conversation with our publisher, and we said, look, we cannot make this work. We tried our best. We spent, I think, like something like 5-6 months on it. All these prototypes you saw were built in like 5 or 6 months. And, either we're ready. We can kill this project. We don't feel it will work. We don't feel it will make a great game. We want to make a great game. So, either we do something else, or we don't think it's worth the money we're spending on it right now. And I think in that sense, like my experience, kind of like experience of having always a plan B, a plan C, kind of helped in that respect, because all along these prototypes, what we always developed on the side, and I don't know if you saw it on the videos, but the combat gameplay was actually becoming more and more and more mature, right? So we asked the publisher to trust us with doing an action game. So what is an action game? An action game is, at least in my definition, is something like Devil May Cry, Bayonetta. So it's like a linear game that allows you like to kick some ass. And that the unique proposition of Gangs of Sherwood would be that, okay, it's an action game, but you can play with your friends, right? Because if you think about it, like there's no game that allow you to do that. I mean, most games that allow you to play with your friends, they allow you, of course, to do stuff, but it's always about like grinding, stats, equipment, blah blah. Here is just getting together, kick some ass, and have some fun. So this is the first prototype of it. You can see the hideout is getting more nice looking. Not that far from what we have right now. And then we get into full blockout land. Actually, it's interesting because this mission here starts with the team in some kind of building, then gets assaulted. And even though it changed completely, it is actually what happens in the first mission of the game as it is right now. So this is where we really started like nailing down what the game was going to be. Understand what it really meant in terms of level design, and I will get into that a bit later. But we had to learn to make an action game because none of us really worked on an action game of this kind before. And it's not as simple as saying like you put enemies and you fight them. No, there's a lot of conventions about this game genre. So what we discovered in this prototype is that you needed to have like these traversal moments, and you needed to have this arena. You needed to have that variety to keep things interesting, right? And also, as you can see, the combat is getting more and more mature. You have dodges, you have like the fancier effects. Enemies have different scales, and at this point, most of the assets still came from Paragon. So at this point, we were already a year into production. We had also some form of evaluation already at the end of the mission. All right, so those were the 3 lives. And now we have the 2 titles of Gangs of Sherwood. All right, so one fine holiday morning, picture me in my swimming suit, well, and my pajama, more like, and with my espresso in Italy, in Sicily. I turn up my phone, and I'm like, I see a news coming up. I say, oh, by the way, Gangs of Sherwood was called Hood. That was the name of the game. At least the project title. And I see this notification come up saying, Hood game announced. And I'm like, what the fuck? Like they announced the game without telling me? Like, what? And then I see the thing, it's like, it's a different game. It's still a Robin Hood game, which also was a bit distressing. But the darker PvPvE, completely different concept of what we have. It was not a bad game at all. Actually, it was kind of interesting when you saw it like that. And but I was like, oh man. So the game that for 1 year we called Hood, became a no title. And it might seem trivial, well, except for the fact that actually finding a new title took some time, but it actually affects so many things that you don't anticipate. So when you create a project in Unreal, you give it a title. In our case, it was Hood, right? You cannot change the name of the project, ever, unless you actually start a new project. So what it means is that in Steam, your game is still called Hood. It means that your execute file is still called Hood. You can rename it, but within the project, I don't know exactly where, there is still a thing called Hood that makes Discord think that you're playing the other Hood game. So when you want to stream our game, it says, oh cool, you're streaming Hood's Outlaws and Legend, the other game. That sucks. Every software that wants to, rely on the identity of your execute files somehow figures that it's not our game, it's the other game. To this day, we haven't solved that issue yet. I'm really doing my best that we solve it before we release the game, but it probably means cloning the whole project. And once you start getting on consoles, cloning the whole project and changing it up, not so easy. Anyway, actually, as a fun anecdote, if you go on, I think it's Ark, the game with dinosaurs and lasers, that project is still called Project Shooter. or something like that, because that was the name of their prototype, and they never changed the title. So now this is the part where I tell you about everything I learned on this project. There's a shitload of it. It's kind of a laundry list. There's no real order of priority. So yeah. Try to keep, if you have any questions about any specific topic, keep them in mind, because we have some Q&A time after this, okay? So all right, let's get into it. Working with a publisher. So I'm not going to go into the pros and cons of working with a publisher. I do like working with publishers a lot, because I suck at selling games, and I suck at marketing, and they're way better than I am at this. But I'm going to go into some details about working with a publisher. So the first thing, and this is something that happened on this project, is that, and again, disclaimer, right now, my relationship with the publishers are really good. We work together every day. It's super fun. At the beginning of the project, we had a producer on the game that was a very nice human being. We got along really well, but he didn't understand the project that we were making. So what does that mean? It means that he could not provide any valuable feedback. Right? And he would not understand what we were making. We were like, yeah, we could do this and that, we have, I don't know, laser arrows. And he was like, yeah, but it's not realistic. And then because he liked realism, and we were like completely like not in sync. So it also meant that I could not provide him the ammo to defend the project with his management. So it was a very like non-conclusive relationship for a while. And that created quite a lot of issues. So my advice there is like, even if you work with a publisher, because I guess if you do, you have done your homework. So you probably work with a publisher that does the kind of games you're making, right? But within that publisher, you have a whole group of people that might be very different from each other. So it's important within the publisher you find a producer that is fit for your game. Okay. So also make sure like processes are solid. It means that, for example, we had a lot of issues at the beginning validating art direction, because they didn't really have an art direction process. Now things change a lot with the publisher as well. Like, it's a publisher is a company, it evolves, right? So, but we had a lot of like back and forth, and eventually it resulted in like, I like red, I like blue, who chooses, right? And so ask always for solid processes. Anticipate deliveries, delays in delivery and payment. That's super important, because sometimes you're late, right? If you're late, you don't get paid, right? But even if you're on time and you do get paid, usually in the contract you have 2 months for them to pay. So when you plan a budget, always take into account like a few months of like safety net, because your money will not get there on day one, right? So especially if you go like, in some like tricky like part of the year, like Christmas or summer, where all the CEOs are on holiday for a month, then and they need to validate all the invoices and shit. So make sure you anticipate for that. Don't rely only on the milestone payment, or you will die. Anticipate also day one patch, post launch. The development doesn't stop when you release the game at all. You will get, like, as soon as your game is out, you will have crash reports. You will have, like, feedback. You will have so many things that you want to fix. So at this point, I think every game releases with a day one patch anyway, but you have to take that into account. So my advice is at least 3 to 6 months of post-launch team that is budgeted for, at least. And also my last advice on this is learn, because you can learn. I learned a lot from them, especially in marketing. Like the song that you saw, that was entirely their idea, and it was great. And I went like on a shooting in Paris to see it. I'd never been on a shooting before. I was like a green plant in a corner. I was like trying to look intelligent while I was watching the shooting, but it was just very cool for me. And hopefully they also learned a bit from how we work, because sometimes they have like processes that don't work that well, like let's say for localization QA, and it goes both ways. So don't see it as a relationship where like you're either one or the other has leverage. It's more of a good relationship with your publisher is mutual help. All right, so game and level design. So what I learned on this project is that when you start working on a game genre that you don't know, I'm not an action game player, I'm more RPG, whatever. You have to understand the conventions of that genre. You have to understand what the players that are fans of that genre like in that. You have to understand what has been built in the past 40 years and build on top of that, you know, and not start from scratch. I mean, you can't decide to like subvert it, and that's totally fine. But I mean, if you do a platform game, you're not going to do like a platform game that where your character runs from right to left, right? No, or unless it's really what you want to do, right? Because it's your statement. It's like, I'm doing a different platform game. But I mean, Mario has been doing it for like 40 years, and they're doing okay. So you're probably better off starting from there and then making it your own. So, what do all these games have in common? When you look at the screenshots, the clues is in the screenshots. Anyone? It's about level design. It's about level design. Mm-hmm. Yes. Third-person camera, yeah. I'll tell you. Flat ground. So, all action games have their fights on flat ground. Okay? On paper, that sounds boring as fuck. Right? It's like, oh, I'm going to do this game where like it's like 30 hours of fights on flat ground. Sexy, you know. Then I go to the art director, good old Mikael, and I'm like, Mikael, you have to design, you know, 100 arenas, all flat ground. Make them look beautiful, man. Like, I think he killed me. Like, and like, you know, when you do like an action game, you become a professional on making grounds look nice. That's like, it's really a thing. I can promise you that. So, the first thing, the most hard lesson I think at the beginning, that it took us like, honestly, it took us 3 months at least to understand and accept the fact that the game needed to be played on flat ground. I'll make you a quick example. If I'm a character, melee character, right? I'm hitting someone. The guy is higher than me. I'm hitting his knees. It doesn't look good at all, right? You want to smash his head, not his knees. All right. So it took us 3 months to accept that, to train the team to do that, and to just research how you make floors look nice. So, learning about how to make action games, to me, there was one big realization is that action games are very much production values dependent. So you have some kinds of games, like, I don't know, most of the time, like puzzle games, for example, that you can prototype with, you know, gameplay prototype. Action games like this one are harder to prototype with, you know, little money. Basically, you need great looking animations, you need effects, you need sound. Otherwise, the mayonnaise doesn't take. So another realization is that if you take like God of War, right? The older ones, like the ones, not the two latest ones. God of War, you only do one thing, right? You fight. But you fight on flat ground. But that flat ground might be in a temple. It might be on the back of a giant. It might be on a flying giant bird. It might be. So you always do the same thing. But the framing of the action is completely different. And that is what changes the how you perceive the game, right? But on paper, when you deconstruct it, you're just fighting on flat ground. And understanding that and keeping that sexy for your team, because when they say, yeah, but we're not doing any interesting gameplay. No, we're only fighting on, you know, on flat ground, but we're framing it. Yeah, but games are about gameplay. Yes, they are, but the packaging counts just as much as the gameplay. That's my opinion. So, level design-wise, I think the structure arena, traversal arena became very clear, very fast. So it means that, you know, alternating between like arenas and traversal means, you know, having opportunities to climb, use grappling hook, just feeling cool when you travel, basically. Then one other point that was really important is like sticking together as a team. So when we started the project, I think myself included, we all were like, you know what would be cool is that every character, every player in the team does his own thing. They have their own objectives, their own skill. They all go separate ways, so they do their thing, and then, you know, for a common objective. That sucked. Didn't work at all. Because when you play a multiplayer game, what we understood is that you want to stick with your team. So at one point, if you get lost and you're like, dude, where are you? Where are you? And you spend most of your time finding each other, I'm sure it might work for some games. But in our case, it was, you know, it's an easy game to pick up and play, it didn't work at all. So what we understood is that we need to give the players the illusion of, you know, players being able to take separate paths, but you still need to keep eye contact with your teammates. The easiest example to make is, you know, you have a path and you have an overpass. So, you know, the two characters can, like, you know, you can see each other traversing some parts, and it's super basic, but it works. All right. So planning your time early, also very important. At first, our levels all lasted like 40 minutes. What happened is that our first level, when people died, it was so long that when they died near the end, it was too long, and they didn't want to start again. So now the first level of the game, we actually cut half of it, and it lasts like 20 minutes. So what it means is that it's short enough that when they die at 15-minute mark, they're like, yeah, okay, let's go again, you know. And that's a super important lesson that I honestly, I don't know why I didn't think about it before, but you need to make content that is adapted to the typical play sessions of your game. And we have longer levels right now. We have levels that last 45 minutes, but have the option to allow your players to play for the amount of time they want, right? Because obviously it's a multiplayer game, so you cannot really save your in-mission progress. So, and then performance target in action games, performance, super important. 60 FPS, that's what you need. Did we achieve that? Hell no. Most of the time we do, but we have stutters, we have like frame loss, and that's too bad. I think we just didn't have the technical knowledge to really make sure the game is like 60 FPS all the time. But until the game is patched, I will make it my personal mission to try to reach that objective, full 60 FPS, because I want to have these technical analysis videos on YouTube that say, this game is always 60 FPS. Next, oh, actually, this is like an example of level design documents. You can see on the left, it's a blockout level, so this is like one very early version, and this is when the level gets more complete. This is like awesome work by our level design team, and the publisher always asks for these kinds of documents, which was really good for us because it really forced us to keep this kind of documentation, because otherwise we would never have done it. But this actually allowed us to analyze and easily count all the arenas, the encounter types we had, and was really good. And you can see, like, typically there, you know, like arena, the traverse arena. The structure is pretty clear, but it was really important to me that every arena felt different, every level felt different from each other, and hopefully we achieved that. Story and narratives. So, Domenico's here, and we can talk about it later. One thing that the game was missing when I got on the project was story. So there was a setting. One thing that I already knew, but this project really convinced me about, is that you should start with a story. I often see projects that have mechanics, that have nice graphics, but you need a message, you need a story. You don't need something complex, you know, just get a classic story. All the story archetypes have been written, I guess, at this point. So you just pick what you like and make it your own. It's also something that I learned in Japan. I had this creative director of mine called Ando-san. Ando-san, I would go to him and I was like, Ando-san, I have this very nice mechanic gameplay. He was like, hey, story. And like, yeah, no story, I have like a gameplay. Like, story first. So always story first. Why? Because you create a brand. Because Gangs of Sherwood, for what I know, could be a strategy game. It could be a visual novel. It could be whatever, but it would still be within the brand. Okay? So the brand, I mean, as a studio, especially, it's in your best interest to develop brands, right? So try to come up with a story, a simple one, you know. In the end, it turns out that the Gangs of Sherwood story is very close to Star Wars for some reason. Just, you know, embrace it. It's fine. Narrative device is very important, because how do you communicate your story, right? I saw this very cool example of Yakuza, where basically they have these very cool cutscenes, right, that last like forever with dialogues, mocap, whatever. And then they have cutscenes where like they look a bit like shit, and then the first two dialogues have a bit of voice, and then they stop the voices, I don't know why. And then have another type of cutscenes where it's like slideshow of people talking with no voice. You're like, okay. So you don't need to be consistent. It's not because you have a few cutscenes that you need to have cutscenes everywhere. Final Fantasy 16, if you played it, same thing. Most of the cutscenes some of them are amazing. most of them are shit, and that's fine, you know. So fortunately, Domenico here had the great idea of coming up with puppet shows to convey your story, which I think is one of the coolest things about the project, and I hope you guys get to see them because they're really fun. UI and UX. Okay, I'm going to spit some hate here. So I've been a teacher for a few years. I think like I would be fucking rich if I got $1 or €1 or whatever every time I heard people saying, "Oh, games are much better without UI." Why? Why? Look at this. Look at these games. UI is fucking amazing. I've been a teacher in schools. I never seen a teacher saying to students like, UI is great. There's no game without UI. You can make a game without UI. You can, of course, right? I mean, even if you take like Breath of the Wild. Breath of the Wild has even the option to reduce the UI in the HUD, right? But all the UI, when you press your start button, is extremely competent. It's a nice map, a nice quest tracker. UI is super important. It is also very cool and interesting. And it can be a pillar of your art direction. You know, those games that I just showed, like Persona would not be Persona without the UI, right? All the Kojima games, most of the time you spend it in UI, like configuring, like Death Stranding, like the time you spend like configuring your pizza boxes. Like, I mean, you need good UI. So my point is this: don't leave it as an afterthought. Good UI is really expensive to make because it's not only UI, it's like effects, animation, sound. You need UI in pre-production because it supports the creative direction of your art, of your game. And then you need it in production because you need to make it. And then you need it in let's say, post-production because, you know, there are bugs. There is, you know, players saying, I don't understand how to do this. Then you need to modify your UI. So, you know, a UI artist is a full-time job, okay? We were understaffed for this project in respect, and it shows. UI is not as good as it could. But my advice is really, really spend money on UI. And also, an interesting trend is that, I don't know if you've seen like in recent AAA games, a lot of games actually, even on console, they do have cursor navigation. Final Fantasy 16, No Man's Sky, all these games you actually control your, like a mouse cursor, but with your stick. But at the same time, they also allow to navigate with your D-pad, right? So this is something that becomes much more common right now. So if you're a designer or a director or a UI artist, really take some time to analyze the latest trends in UI because they evolve a lot. You know, they've been influenced by a lot of stuff, mobile gaming, Facebook gaming. It's really super interesting. Okay? Sound design. Well, sound is important. Of course, it is. It is also expensive, not as expensive as in like too expensive, but you have to set aside a decent amount of budget for the sound in your game. Usually I guess in general you're saying that between 5% and 8% is a normal budget for sound in a game. So if you're on a 50 million euros budget, that's a lot of money for sound, but it's fair. It's what is required. Okay, we had a dedicated team, Demute. Hello, and that was great for us because it meant that we had a keys. How do you say, like a keys and hands solution? So basically, Demute would work with us. Like they would make the sounds, like integrate them in the project, which was really good because it allowed me not to have any developers dedicated to sound, and they would probably do it way better than internally we would have done it. They also handle the music production, the voice production. So my advice is have a dedicated sound team. Don't think it's a small thing. It's not, especially when your games become big. Like when you do open world, how do you handle memory stuff with sound? It's a series of very complex topics. You don't want to like wing it. You won't. So another thing we did on this project is have music very early. So it was totally illegal music ripped from other games, but at least it gave a feeling. And it was not necessarily for outside people, but it was for the team, right? I wanted my team to understand what mood I was going for all the time. And last point, use authentic voices. I was at Gamescom the other day, well, in August, and a guy comes to me, and he's like, "Hey, I'm a blah blah blah," and I'm like, "Okay," and I'm selling your game to distributors in Australia and New Zealand. I'm like, "Okay, cool," and he's like, "And I have to tell you, I have like 3 distributors that passed on your games, so it means that they refused to sell our games because of the voices." I was like, okay, well, so the voices are all in English with, British accents. And apparently, since most of the actors were not native English speakers, or at least not native speakers from Sherwood, because it's an actual place in England, it seems that it sounds to native English speakers as weird. And that is enough for some distributors not to take your game. It's the first time it happens to me. But I know that it's a factor that I will keep in mind next time we decide where to record voices. So one last part, and this is my favorite one, our gang, our team. So the game was actually developed by a core team of around 20 people. We had 4 developers. We actually now, a 5th one joined the team recently for day 1 patch, but the whole game was made by 4 people, 4 developers, I mean, plus artists, plus myself, designer, producer, etc., 20 people. Full production, we were around 45. That included the mute for the sound. We had an external team for FQA. FQA is functional QA. That means like the QA that actually tests your game, tells you what is broken. And then we have CQA, which is compliance QA. And that they test what is going to break for Microsoft or Sony. And then we had, of course, localization. Lessons with this are kind of classic. Make sure your team is not understaffed in key areas. We were in quite a few areas, like effects, UI, and in my opinion, it shows a bit in the game. And yeah, it's just lessons learned for the future. Don't mix roles. And with this, I'm talking mostly about me, because the game was missing producers. We only had 1 producer, and we definitely would have needed a second one. We only had 1 designer. We should have had another one. What that meant is that me, as a creative director or game director, whatever, I had to actually do some paper design myself. And all the time I spent doing paper design myself is time I could not spend assisting my team. And that resulted in direct loss of focus in other areas. And also another point is avoid code ownership. That's my personal take on it. Code ownership means when one person is responsible for a specific system, because when that person leaves on holiday or is lucky enough to have a baby or whatever, your project is fucked. So always try to have knowledge shared between several developers, because if something happens, someone else can take over. Okay? And that's it for me. I hope there were like interesting things for you in this talk. The game is coming out on November 30th. Until like 3 days ago, it was supposed to come out next Thursday, but actually it was delayed a bit because Microsoft. And yeah, that's it. And I hope you enjoy my talk. And if you wanna catch up with me, just send me a tweet or whatever, an X, or I don't know how you say. I'm available whenever. Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Andreas. So I will start with a few questions and then hand it to you if you have some. If you already have questions, please raise your hand. Not yet. One here. Okay, we'll get to you. So my name is Domenico. I'm here as a moderator, but I was also involved in the game. I wrote the story of the game and the dialogues and some of the stuff as well. And I have a first question about scale. You mentioned a little bit that the levels were too long at the beginning, and then you had to scale them down. It was...
Yeah, we killed part of your story,
yeah? Yeah. No, but scale affected everything. So in the iterations, the different iterations of the game, there was, of course, the length of the level, never the amount of characters, I think, was always 4 and always limited 4. But then equipment, everything, the length of the level. So
enemies for sure.
Was it just budget reasons, or was it something else involved? Or the game was too confused?
I don't really view it as a budget, as in the sense of money, but more as a time budget. I knew how much time we still had to actually complete the game, and at one point when you've been working in this for a few years, you get a gut feeling, right? You go, okay, I have like still 10 enemies to produce. How much is going to take? I only have 6 months. Yeah, maybe not. Let's cut them. And so yeah, it's I think like level length was probably the first one though. Like, but it's a good thing. I mean, I'm really happy about it because now the game is more. I see actually people like dying, retrying, and I'm pretty sure like with the original length, it would not have been the case.
But also features. There were features in gameplay and stuff.
Well, I mean, we had flying castles. We don't have them anymore. So, no, I guess yeah, but I wouldn't say that we got a lot of features. Honestly, like in the latest iteration of the game, the action game, I think at that point we only had 1.5 years ahead of us to actually make a game, and then it turned out 2 years because we were late. But at that point, we were like so like short on time that we're really the axe was there every day to cut stuff and to really make it like smaller but nicer.
And it's my only question about story. I already know the answer, but I think it's interesting for everybody in the audience. It was, I think, important not to be a Robin Hood story because you play 4 characters and they're all equivalent, and you may also play one of those characters without the other ones because it's also a solo experience. You can also play solo. So what are the different things you have set up to, except for the title of the game, to make all characters appealing, even though they have different combat styles, but also to make the overall story not feel like the Robin Hood main character storyline?
Yeah, well, I think that I think we developed the personality of the characters a bit more than what you have in your original, like, the classic Robin Hood stuff, Like, Maid Marian usually is like the damsel in distress, and here, like, she's the daughter of the sheriff of Nottingham, and she wants to kill all her family. So there's, like, the base story is a bit more interesting. Little John, he's like a old general from the enemy's army, and we developed more and give them their own identity. I think that's the main thing. And I think that we actually turned the story into a war story, more like the resistance against the sheriff. And it's a bit less the, steal from the rich and give to the poor. We actually turned this into like really our own thing. And we'll see how people react to that.
Yeah, that's interesting because during the talk you said that the genre of the game, the gameplay was an action game, and then there were conventions and codes, but also the genre of the story changed. So there are also action codes and things to respect. Like, for example, the resistance.
Yep.
You said it was similar to Star Wars, and it's also because of that, the David and Goliath kind of approach, where you have a bunch of characters that are outlaws, they are outcasts.
Well, I guess in a way we were lucky that the game is a multiplayer game, because in multiplayer games usually you don't push the story as far as in a single player game. So
I know.
I know. So in a way that kind of like saved us a bit, because considering the time we have, like, it's not like we could have like shot like hours of cutscenes and because you're a multiplayer game, you know that players will not necessarily enjoy the narratives at the pace, at the rhythm that you give the narratives, right? So in a way, your narratives in a multiplayer game becomes optional, and that made it, in my opinion, it made it a bit easier for us, because we knew that the quality of the game didn't rely exclusively on the narratives like a lot of games. So yeah, I think it's frustrating in ways, because you never know really. You cannot give like a narrative rhythm that is very like precise, but in a way, it also saved our ass a bit. So.
But eventually, the guy who is selling the game is a storyteller. So This is a character in the game, Alan Adale, and he's a puppeteer and also a storyteller. He's the one telling the story. So there were questions in the audience. There was just the first one there. Yeah. Please tell us first who you are. Not in details, thank you. Just your field of work. And
I'm Patrick. I'm a developer, and I have a question. What did push you to continue to do an extra prototype? And an extra prototype for the Live 2, when you have signed off, it's not fun for Melee, there is a problem. And the second prototype is not solving the problem again.
Yeah, well, I mean, there were enough positive elements that would make us think that we could probably maybe fix it. And that's why, I think between prototype 2 and 3, we actually added like these ropes that Melee characters could use, and we had ideas, but they never worked out. But we always, at the end of one prototype, we were like, yeah, okay, we still have like some ammo left to actually try to fix this. And then at one point where we could not, we were like, okay, we're out of ammo. let's stop this, you know, and that's what we did. So I'm actually, even in hindsight, I don't think we overextended the time we spent on those, because I mean, as you saw in the videos, the progress was real. It was there. Like every time it looked better. But at one point we hit a roadblock, which was like, this is never going to be as fun as just like shooting guys, you know? So.
Another question? Yes, here.
Hello, I'm Lucas from Alberjacar. I want to ask you a question. You said a lot of time that you were short-handed in the developing of the project. Why didn't you like employ some? Was it just budget reason, time?
Oh no, we did hire more people, but hiring people takes time. Also, like Belgium has this thing where you actually we don't really have a lot of issues hiring juniors, but as soon as you need to hire someone who, you know, you can put in the project and not be too worried about, like, for example, effects, you know, VFX in Unreal, like you can break a project if you don't know what you're doing. Like performance-wise, you can kill everything. UI is the same. If you don't know what you're doing in UI, you can break a project in terms of performance. So you need to find experienced people. And in Belgium, since there are not that many big studios that do like games of this scale, you don't have a lot of people like that. Fortunately, COVID happened, so you know you do find people remotely, but it's still not easy to find really good people that have a bit of experience. And at the same time, as you said, like there's budget reasons. So I think we doubled the initial team that was planned, but still it was mostly made of juniors because we could not find, you know, people that had like the experience here in the motherland.
Thank you.
Another question? Okay, so we can conclude here. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you all.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Please buy that game. Don't wait for the sale.
It's nice. The story is great.